So here's what happened 4 days ago at a congressional hearing. Republicans staged what was supposed to be a clean political win, a sanctuary cities hearing, grieving families at the table, Democrats on the defensive. And then the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee stood up and laid out a documented public safety record that nobody in that room had a single answer for. Not one. I need you to watch this. And then stay with me, because what he said is only the beginning of what this story actually looks like. Watch this.
I thank the chairman and I recognize the ranking member from the state of Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the family members who came to Washington today to tell us the stories of how they lost their children. Please forgive my black and bloody eye. I am nursing a medical injury, but I did not want to miss this important hearing. And if the light gets too intense, forgive me if I put the sunglasses back on. There is no pain, Mr. Chairman, no anguish, no trauma, no catastrophe worse for any parent than having to bury your child. And my heart and my sympathy go to all of you who lost a child, as I did, and to your children who lost a brother or a sister. Nothing hurts more than losing a child, a family member in the prime of their life, or having them suffer a catastrophic injury or assault because someone else decided that their life didn't matter. You are all here today bravely to tell us how much the lives of your children did matter and do matter, and to ensure that their legacies here on earth, while senselessly cut short or dramatically altered, still live on in your work and in your families. In telling your loved ones' stories, you are advancing the righteous goal of ensuring that no other person suffers the pain of what you have gone through. You will not find a single member in this body who disagrees with your goal or your mission. This is a House, this is a Congress filled on both sides with mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, grandparents, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. We all want to protect our families and to keep them safe from harm. The terrible crimes that your families have suffered must be universally condemned. Victims of violent crimes, all violent crimes, victims of vehicular homicides, and victims of reckless driving, all of them must be listened to, must be heard, and must be respected. Victims must receive justice for the dreadful crimes that took their loved ones away. Perpetrators must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of our laws. Those who attack police officers or those who attack civilians must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of our laws. No one should be granted a blanket pardon without proof of remorse or rehabilitation or restitution to their victims. And once perpetrators have served their sentence here, if they're in our country illegally, they should be removed from our country. This is not a partisan problem, and nobody should try to turn it into a partisan problem. Tragically, the stories that we hear today can be told of any president. President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, President Biden, each of their administrations released undocumented immigrants who went on to commit violent crimes. We could fill the room with people speaking of their lost family members at the hands of people who came into the country illegally under Democratic and Republican administrations alike. It's not a partisan problem. Everyone knows our immigration system has been broken for decades. Administration after administration, we have lacked the political will to do the hard work of putting together a bipartisan solution. We need an immigration system that makes it a lot harder to come here illegally, or impossible to come here illegally, and a lot easier to come here legally to participate in the American dream. We need an immigration system that gives dreamers and others who have built a productive and law-abiding life in our country a pathway to legal status. Alas, this administration is focused on mass arrests, mass detention, and mass deportation that are dividing our country in unprecedented ways. To achieve this goal, DHS is not focused on going after the worst of the worst, a category of violent criminals quickly exhausted, with Stephen Miller demanding 3,000 draconian immigration arrests every single day. Federal agents simply started indiscriminately rounding up immigrants and American citizens who looked like immigrants, according to the agents. ICE has arrested kindergartners, daycare teachers, parents dropping off their kids at school. They dragged U.S. citizen grandparents out of their homes in their underwear in sub-zero temperatures and ripped children from their beds in the middle of the night, using them as bait to arrest their parents. When ICE does manage to arrest people with criminal records or charges, those are often people who are currently in custody. In many cases, ICE is effectively giving criminals get-out-of-jail-free cards by deporting them in the middle of their criminal sentences, or even worse, deporting them before their trials can even begin, depriving their victims of justice. Also, the agency can simply jack up the president's deportation numbers. This makes it vital to hear from families like yours who have suffered from terrible crimes, to hear about the importance of accountability for those crimes. Your testimony is an important and powerful reminder that the fundamental responsibility of our federal law enforcement and justice system is to keep the people safe and to ensure that no one is ever above the law and no one is ever beneath it. The government must stand on the side of victims of crimes, not their perpetrators. I try to remind Attorney General Bondi of that principle when she appeared here before our committee. That's why we've been so focused on insisting that we hear from the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and their elite pedophile network, the women survivors who our government has failed at every turn. We failed to protect them from the appalling human trafficking and rape ring in the first place. Then our government failed them again by not holding any of Epstein's powerful friends accountable, exposing victims' names while censoring the names of perpetrators and playing outrageous political games with the files in DOJ's possession that they are legally compelled to turn over to Congress and make public. I was happy to hear that the First Lady of the United States agrees with that, and we hope that our committee will heed her call to hold hearings, as Mrs. Trump said, with the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's billion-dollar global sex trafficking ring. This is also why we speak up for all of the people victimized and harmed by the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Not only the over 150 police officers who were bludgeoned, beaten, crushed, and even died because of what happened that day, but also for all of those who have been harmed by the January 6 perpetrators after they got their pardons from President Trump. These pardon recipients have gone on to abuse women and children, plot murders, and commit sexual assault and kidnapping. After January 6 rioter Andrew Paul Johnson got his pardon from President Trump, he repeatedly sexually abused two 12-year-old children and tried to keep them quiet by promising to share with them some of the millions of dollars in restitution that he plans to receive from the Trump administration. If not for President Trump's pardon, these children never would have been molested. Their innocence would not have been shattered by this monster. It is essential to hear from people harmed also by the aggressive police state-style immigration enforcement tactics that have terrified the country. They don't target the worst of the worst. They are the worst of the worst. This includes hearing from the families of the 3 American citizens ICE agents have gunned down point blank in our streets, like Renee Good, the 36-year-old mother and poet who was shot 3 times in the head and body by an ICE officer while she was driving her car. This includes the American citizens who have been profiled, beaten, detained, and even deported by ICE. It includes the police officers who are finding it more difficult to do their jobs because immigrant communities no longer trust them, and prosecutors whose cases are stymied because ICE deports their defendants, witnesses, and victims before their trials can even begin. And it includes the family members of people who have died at the hands of their abusers because they were too afraid to report them to the police for fear they would be deported. Failing to arrest and deport the worst of the worst makes all of us less safe, but so too does allowing federal agents to trample the rights and freedoms of the American people. I want to thank you all again for appearing before us today and hope that we will continue to listen to the voices of everyone whose lives have been so immeasurably altered by the failure of our government to act and enact meaningful policy changes to keep all of our streets and all of our people safe. I look forward to hearing your testimony today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included.
More than 3 months after Renee Good was shot and killed in Minneapolis, Her case has no federal answer, and I want you to understand what that actually means, because the obstruction here is not accidental. State officials say her car, the vehicle she was sitting in when she was killed, is sitting shrink-wrapped in an FBI warehouse, untouched, never examined. Minnesota and Hennepin County had to sue the Trump administration just to try to access the evidence. A police accountability expert at the University of St. Thomas told NPR, the federal government is actively preventing the state from investigating. And just this week, a federal judge had to issue an order forcing DHS, DOJ, and ICE to hand over evidence within 3 weeks. Evidence that, by the way, won't be made public. Let that sink in. The federal government is working harder to bury the evidence than it ever did to explain the shooting. And here's what the administration said publicly. Former DHS Secretary Kristi Noem called her a domestic terrorist at a press conference without a single document, record, or piece of evidence to back that up. The officer who fired had been dragged by a car during a completely separate enforcement stop in Bloomington, Minnesota about 6 months earlier. A different incident, different people, had nothing to do with this. The administration kept citing that earlier injury anyway. Good had never crossed paths with that officer before the morning he killed her. She wasn't alone. On January 24th, 17 days after her death, a second American citizen named Alex Pretty was shot and killed in Minneapolis by federal border agents. He was a 37-year-old ICU nurse at a Veterans Affairs hospital, filming agents with his phone. Bystander video verified by Reuters, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, and ABC News shows him pinned face down on the ground when the shots were fired. The administration called him a domestic terrorist who arrived to inflict maximum damage. His parents said he cared about people deeply. His only police interactions in his entire life were traffic tickets. Traffic tickets. And look, here's the bigger picture the administration does not want you to see. The Vera Institute found that by February 2026, federal agents had opened fire at least 17 times since Trump returned to office, killing 4 people and injuring 8 more. In all 3 Minneapolis shootings, federal authorities physically blocked state investigators from accessing the scenes, seized the evidence, and labeled every single victim a threat. The Frontline and ProPublica joint investigation, caught in the crackdown, released just 2 days before last Wednesday's hearing, documented agents deploying tear gas and pepper balls against U.S. citizens standing on public sidewalks in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Los Angeles. A former DOJ official described what the cameras captured as use of excessive force, and here's where all of that enforcement intensity came from. In late May of 2025, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller called a meeting with senior ICE leaders and threatened to fire every field office director whose arrest numbers ranked in the bottom 10% monthly. He then set a quota, 3,000 arrests per day. He confirmed it publicly on Fox News, calling that figure a minimum and promising to keep pushing it higher. That quota was triple what ICE had been averaging, and when the pool of actual violent criminals wasn't anywhere near large enough to hit those numbers, which it wasn't, agents had to go somewhere, so they went everywhere. Now let's talk about the numbers, because the data tells a story the administration actively lied about. A National Bureau of Economic Research working paper by CU Boulder economists found that in the first 10 months of Trump's second term, ICE averaged 821 arrests per day, a 170% jump from Biden's final year. But here's what that number actually means in practice. Only 37% of those arrests involved anyone with a criminal conviction. 37%. An agency actually focused on dangerous criminals doesn't produce a number like that. And if that shocks you, the internal DHS data leaked to the Cato Institute is even more damning. Of every person booked into ICE detention since October 1st, 2025, 73% had no criminal conviction of any kind. Nearly half had no conviction and no pending charges whatsoever. Only 5%, had a violent criminal conviction. When the Cato Institute published that, the administration called it made up. So they published the raw data they got directly from ICE and invited anyone to challenge it. Nobody did. Because here's what that scale of detention actually costs in human lives. The American Immigration Council found that more people died in ICE detention during 2025 than in the previous 4 years combined. As of April 4th, 2026, over 60,300 people were sitting in ICE detention, with 70.8% having no criminal conviction, according to the nonpartisan Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse at Syracuse University. And Congress's response to all of that was to authorize $45 billion in new detention funding, $45 billion to expand a system that is already killing people and is demonstrably not focused on violent criminals. Now let's get to the pardons, because this is where it gets even more infuriating. You already heard the Johnson case described. Here's what the video couldn't show you. 7 months after Trump freed him, law enforcement tracked him down in Tennessee and put him back in custody. A Florida jury then convicted him in February 2026 on 5 criminal counts, including molesting a child under 12 and another under 16. On March 5, 2026, a judge sentenced him to life in prison. He was actively serving his Capitol riot sentence when the pardon freed him. The abuse of those children followed directly from that decision. That is not an opinion. That is a documented, court-verified sequence of events. And he isn't the only one. NPR has documented multiple other pardoned January 6 defendants who faced new criminal charges since their release, including possession of child sexual abuse material and breaking and entering. Christopher Moynihan, another pardoned rioter, pleaded guilty to threatening to kill House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And by the way, here is something the administration really does not want you sitting with. Study after study, replicated across decades and institutions, consistently finds that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, commit violent crimes at lower rates than people born in the U.S. A 2020 proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences study found that undocumented immigrants showed substantially lower rates of crime than both native U.S. citizens and legal immigrants. The 2015 National Academies of Sciences report put the incarceration rate for foreign-born men at 1/4 that of the native-born. A 2024 National Bureau of Economic Research working paper covering 150 years of data found immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than all U.S.-born men. And the CU Boulder economists warned that sweeping up people with no criminal record could backfire and make communities less safe, because when the people most likely to witness crimes are too afraid to talk to police, violent offenders keep operating. Think about what that means for your actual neighborhood. So what do you get when you set a quota of 3,000 arrests a day and the pool of actual violent criminals can't fill it? You get ICE at Home Depot parking lots. You get agents at school drop-offs. A Texas farmer told local TV news that within weeks of the enforcement surge, there were 0 people willing to show up to work in his fields regardless of immigration status because the fear had spread that far. Even Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins had to step in and briefly pause raids on farms, hotels, and restaurants. That pause lasted days. Then, the enforcement resumed. And the courts have already documented what this quota-driven machine does to people who show up and follow the rules. In late July 2025, the National Immigrant Justice Center filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of 12 people who were arrested by ICE at immigration courthouses, people who showed up for their own scheduled hearings, only to have the government dismiss their cases and detain them at the door. One plaintiff was deported to Ecuador before his asylum claim could even be heard, a man who fled persecution tied to his LGBTQ identity and advocacy. The NIJC called it exactly what it is: weaponizing immigration courts, turning them from neutral forums into traps. Meanwhile, the legislative framework just kept expanding. Congress passed the Laken Riley Act in January 2025, stripping more people of the right to even request a bond hearing while their cases are pending. Child detention under Trump jumped 6-fold. The Marshall Project found as many as 400 children in ICE custody on a single day, inside a system that just had its deadliest year in over 2 decades. Then, they gutted the oversight. The Vera Institute documented that the Trump administration removed the federal watchdog responsible for monitoring civil rights violations at DHS and blocked congressional access to detention facilities. And ICE started withholding the biweekly detention spreadsheet that Congress had specifically required it to publish, the same spreadsheet researchers were using to track who was actually being held and why. Less accountability, more detainees, fewer people watching. Since last Wednesday's hearing, the House Judiciary Committee has been moving to mark up the Shutdown Sanctuary Policies Act, which would strip federal funding from any jurisdiction that doesn't cooperate with ICE detainers. The January 7th shooting still has no federal answer. The Minnesota lawsuit is still in court. The families who came to Washington to testify are still waiting to find out if it changes anything. And the families of both Minneapolis victims are still waiting for answers their own government has actively refused to hand over. Here's the bottom line. 2 Americans killed by federal immigration agents, investigations stonewalled. A record number of deaths inside detention. More than 42,000 people in federal custody with no criminal conviction. A pardoned rioter serving life for abusing children he never would have reached if his sentence had stood. Every one of those facts has a name behind it, a family behind it, and a federal record behind it. The same Congress that sat across from Angel families last Wednesday and demanded accountability owes that same standard to every single one of these cases. The question Raskin put in that room 4 days ago is still sitting there, unanswered. And it's not a complicated question. Whose safety is this government actually protecting? Thanks for watching this segment of In Case You Missed It. Go ahead and like the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below because I want to hear your thoughts. Make sure you click the bell icon for more updates. Subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video.